Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm Lindsay Barber Petticourt, and in this episode we talk to Jemc, author of The Grip of It, one of my favorite books of 2017, and included in the library's favorite fiction of 2017 booklet, and also in the best fiction books of 2017 list from the Chicago Review of Books. When The Grip of It came out in August, it received dozens of positive reviews, including starred reviews from Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, and Kirkus. It also received recommendations from Entertainment Weekly, the AV Club, the Oprah Magazine, and many, many more. In this interview, we talked to Jemc about The Grip of It, which at its most basic level is a haunted house story about a couple and their first home. We also talk about a short essay Jemc wrote about collecting porcelain figurines, the joys of rereading books, the uncanny, and what creeps us out. So please enjoy this interview with Jemc. Thank you for joining us on our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today we're mostly going to talk about your book, The Grip of It, which came out in August. Mm-hmm. I read it the week it came out. I was very excited to get my hands on it.
Thank you so much.
I had heard about it back in May, I think, so I immediately put in the purchase request at the library, and I was like, okay, we have to get this. And it was, it's my type of horror novel. I think the creepiness level is just right for what I want.
Oh, cool.
So
thanks.
Obviously, we know what the book is about, but would you want to give maybe a short summary so people listening to the podcast have an idea of what we're talking about?
Sure, yeah. So,
okay.
So my general description is that a couple has experienced some trouble in their marriage. The husband, James, has a gambling addiction, and so they decide that they're maybe going to try something new to get away from that trouble that they've been experiencing, and they've lived in the city all of their lives, and they decide, we'll move to the country, we'll buy a house, we'll have a fresh start, we'll get out of our normal routines in a way of, hopefully kind of having just some new energy in the relationship. And so they buy this house, and of course the house is not the answer that they've been looking for, and becomes another source of trouble. So, and is possibly haunted by spirits or by all that's sort of unsaid or disquieted between them, and things move on from there.
Obviously, it's about the relationship between Julie and James, but it's also about a haunted house. Did you start with one or the other that you kind of wanted to explore and move from there?
I did, yeah. I just knew I wanted to write a haunted house story. Yes. Yeah. So,
cool.
So I kind of started, and I figured at some point, hopefully, I'll figure out what I want to use the haunted house story to say. And so, yeah. So slowly, I figured out what it was about between Julie and James. Yeah.
That makes sense to me. So Julie and James, they're a young married couple. I was wondering why you wanted to do a young couple and maybe not an older couple, a couple that have been together for a very long time.
Well, I don't know that I actually say how long they've been married in the book. Yeah. And
it feels like a couple of years, I think, is more of what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I think in my mind, I'd actually assumed that they were together for longer than a couple years.
Okay.
But it's also interesting to see reviewer responses, reader responses to that couple, because I imagine them to be like in their later 30s, and a lot of people are reading them to be, a lot of reviews have referred to it as a millennial relationship, which, I mean, I think technically it could be.
Maybe that's what stuck in my head at one point.
Mm-hmm. So, so that's been an interesting thing. I don't really care. I have no problem with millennials. I think millennials are great. So if people want to read it in that way, that's fine. I was talking with friends of mine. So I'm in my mid 30s, and I was talking with friends who are in their later 30s, and they said, "Oh, we definitely read them as people in their later 30s, but maybe that says more about us and our sort of stunted adulthood or something than it says about, than it says about how others should be reading it, So,
right.
So, I mean, I guess, I was writing about people in that age range because it was sort of what was familiar to me. It was the sort of level of relationship that I was comfortable writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think not that they're blank slates by any means, but I think I was just like, okay, without that specific information, they're probably about my age, and I've been married for a couple years, and so I think that's about what I.
Oh, so that's interesting, though, that you put your sort of situation onto onto them then too. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what a lot of people are doing, and then if it feels too far from where say the reviewer was, like if it were someone in their reviewing the book and they're in their 40s or 50s or something, maybe they read that more as like a millennial relationship because it just feels very far from what their idea of a relationship is or something.
I have to say, though, I thought it was their entire relationship, aside from all the haunting stuff, all the supernatural stuff, felt very true.
Oh, thanks.
The limits of your ability to communicate with somebody who you feel like you've given everything to, there's still those gaps there. And I just thought it was a really good description, a really good example of that type of relationship. And then all the haunting stuff comes in, and we see it kind of fill those cracks and create the spaces in it. So I just really enjoyed that part.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, I don't know. I think it's something that I think about a lot, because I mean the dynamic between them isn't such that like there are things that they can't say, but they're trying to be not polite with each other, but caring toward each other. I think in a way that like they don't want to just there are little things about each other that annoy them, but they want to kind of pick their battles and decide how they're going to show each other affection and care and kindness, So sometimes that might mean just not mentioning something or not wanting to freak the other person out if they can avoid it. And then that really becomes a source of trouble, actually.
Yeah, later on. Yeah, and that was all this stuff that felt very, I've seen that before, or I've recognized that in myself before. A couple months ago, you had an essay on, I think it was a couple months ago, I actually didn't look at the date. You had an essay on Tor.com about collecting odd porcelain figurines. I loved that essay. The figurines were actually kind of, they were wonderfully creepy, the pictures in there. But so with regards specifically to the figurines, you say, my love of the familiar made strange has remained consistent over the course of my life thus far, which I actually think is a really good description of the grip of it. So was this kind of the mood you were aiming for when you wrote this story, kind of the familiar made sort of surreal by your surroundings?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think those are the things that really kind of spook me in life, where I'm not really drawn to monsters or the supernatural in a really direct way, but I am really it's more that when there's something that you are very familiar with or very comfortable with, when something sort of feels off or awry in those situations that that affect me more. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the heart of a haunted house novel, is that, and so, I mean, this is the idea of the uncanny, right? That, and that like can be rooted in Freud's unheimlich, which actually means unhomely.
Okay.
So the idea of the uncanny, of the familiar made strange, is actually rooted in the idea of the house made uncomfortable, of your home made uncomfortable. And so, I mean, I think that's totally what I was thinking about. Yeah. And that's why I tried to, that's why Tor asked me if I would write something, and they sort of gave me some different categories I could fit into. And I thought, well, okay, what do I do? Like, what kind of hobbies do I have have that fit into, that I could relate to the book somehow.
Right.
And those ceramic figures, I mean, I wouldn't really call it a hobby. I would call it more of like a strange, like, gift economy that's developed in my family. But they are, I mean, I do think they're kind of an echo of that same obsession or same interest that I mean, they're satisfying to me because they were produced at a time when you know, China and porcelain was just really supposed to be beautiful and not funny or creepy. And so it was just doing this kind of totally different thing that seemed unexpected. And like, you know, kind of like, I think the first time that I looked at those things, I was thinking, oh, okay, are the people who made this in on the joke, or do they think this is beautiful?
Right.
And I was a kid when I saw them for the first time. And this is talking about a company called Schaefer and Bader, a German ceramicist company that was making ceramics, just for the podcast listeners who might not have looked at the article.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I mean, when I was a kid and I saw these things for the first time, I was so confused by them. And that was satisfying to me, to be confused by them.
Oh, yeah. I get that. I think I appreciate that more as an adult than I would have as a kid. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because that quote, I was like, oh, this is why I like the book so much. It's the familiar made very uncanny.
Yeah.
The prologue to the book, where you quote Wittgenstein, I had never heard of this philosopher before, but I loved the sentiment at the beginning that I'm just going to read the one little bit. Imagine that a child was quite specially clever, so clever that he could at once be taught the doubtfulness of the existence of all things. So he learns from the beginning, that is probably a chair. And now, how does he learn the question, is that also really a chair? Did you already have those quotes down when you sat down to write the book, or did you remember them as you were writing the book?
No, I read that book while I was working. I read his book Settle while I was working on The Grip of It.
Oh, okay.
And saw that quote, that little pair of entries from the book, and thought, oh, this is exactly it. You know, like, how can you, if you were in the situation where all this strange stuff is happening in this house, first you would try and reason your way through it, and try to come up with all of the different possibilities that could explain it. But once you have this body of possibilities, then how do you decide which one to actually believe? Or how do you kind of comfort yourself with these options for what could be causing the situation without becoming so comfortable as to rely on them to put yourself in danger? So, it seemed like the perfect kind of philosophical expression of what I was thinking about when I was writing the book.
No, but then reading that quote of here's what I know, here's what I believe, I can't reconcile it with anything that's happened, so I have to lean back on what I've already learned. I don't know how to learn, is this also not a chair?
I mean, that's what I'm sort of interested in. What I was interested in writing the book is that, Julie has her opinions and James has his, and then the reader can sort of decide for themselves between the information that they get from both of those narrators what they want to believe. And there are sort of a kind of limitless number of combinations of answers that an individual could arrive to based on all the different options to solve the mystery.
It was actually quite fun rereading it, knowing some of the things that were going to happen.
Yeah.
Just put me in a slightly different mindset. So it was, it makes for a good reread, which is always nice.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I didn't used to be a big rereader, but I'm slowly getting more and more into it. And I'm always just so excited and surprised by when I reread to see how much a writer was giving me. That was like leading me up to what I didn't see coming. And just even though, like I think of myself as a really attentive, smart reader, but there's always just so much that I didn't notice or that that I didn't see as being somehow, I don't know, even just foreshadowing or leading up to little clues that that really, are just there for the pleasure of kind of building resonance and depth. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still discovering that as an adult.
Yeah.
the pleasures
I
of
feel
rereading.
like it's so hard to justify rereading because there's so much I want to read.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I know exactly how that goes. It's one of the downfalls of working in a library.
Yeah. Oh,
Seeing
I can't
everything.
imagine. Yeah.
And you teach writing, right? So it's not like you're also not exposed to.
Yeah, well, I think it's teaching that has allowed me to revisit books more because once I figure out, most of the time when I pick the writing that we'll read in a class, it's something that I've read before and then I'll reread it for the class, and it's that situation that's sort of forcing me into taking time to revisit texts and to get to know them in a deeper way.
I could see that. You've said in other interviews that you like to read horror stories, though you're not necessarily a big reader of like long horror novels, but you like horror stories. What is it that you like in a horror story?
Yeah, I think that maybe the distinction I've made is that like I've always just really liked ghost stories or scary stories. Like since I was a kid, I just all of those kind of like scary stories to read in the dark books or that kind of stuff. Yeah, and so I mean I have read. I mean I've read quite a few horror novels as well, mostly haunted house in the sort of haunted house subgenre, though. And I mean, I guess like what I like most are just I like the way that horror fiction can kind of explore the limits of what humanity thinks is possible, I guess, or of kind of alternative ways of thinking, of knowing things, or like how reason works and how logic works, which I mean, it seems like maybe kind of an unusual way to go about that because, like, I mean, I think you could make the same case for science fiction, but science fiction isn't really my thing as much because I feel like science fiction has to do with like humans developing their abilities like beyond a certain point, whereas like with horror stories, ghost stories, that kind of stuff, it's like allowing in the possibility of other types of knowing or of existence or something that seems of interest to me, though I don't know if you asked me if I believed in ghosts. I think I would say no, so so it's just being curious about what would life be if you allowed that possibility into your mind.
Right. I think I know exactly what you're getting at. I want to talk about the creepiness level of The Grip of It. You kind of keep up the creepiness level throughout the novel, although obviously it reaches a bit of a peak closer towards the end. But for the most part, there's a lot of moments, especially between Julie and James, that feel very everyday, very mundane. Like, oh, I've had that conversation with my husband, or yes, we sit like that on the couch and watch TV. But I would be reading along at this very mundane act, and that creepiness would kind of seep in, and I couldn't immediately identify it. I just felt a little uneasy. And so I was wondering if you used, was it the language you used? Was it the purposeful switching back and forth between Julie's point of view and James' point of view that kind of kept up that just slight discomfort, I guess, which is a good thing. I don't mean that.
Yeah, I think it's a combo of those two things. I think one thing is that they're both always kind of just like a little bit off balance in the book. Like they're always looking for the thing that's kind of off around them, and so their awareness is different than it would be if they were comfortable and feeling at ease. So they're kind of always, instead of just kind of like zoning out, always like scanning the room for clues or something. But then, yes, I consciously tried to kind of twist language throughout the book to as a way of allowing like the form of the language to mimic the unease and the creepiness that they're experiencing. So so instead of saying things in a really straightforward way, trying to find a kind of wrong way to say really mundane things, to make to observe the world around them, so that even when they're just looking at something really common or that they see every day, even that kind of gets twisted a little bit because of the language that they're using to describe it.
Yeah. Well, I think it did a really good job.
Thanks.
So the Grip of It came out this year. Are you working on another project now?
Yeah, I'm working on a historical fiction project, actually.
Oh, okay.
That is set in like the 1840s to 1880s Bavaria.
Okay.
And
not traditional historical fiction fare sometimes.
Oh, yeah. It's a little, I mean, I tried to kind of find some, I mean, I didn't set out to write historical fiction. This time I just found a subject that I thought was interesting. But it's set in these like castles in the Bavarian countryside, and so so there's still kind of like a hint of the sort of unusual interiors and figuring out like a little bit of mystery and puzzles to be solved. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm already looking forward to it.
Thank you.
That sounds like my my type of book. We always like to end our interviews by asking what you are reading lately. So do you have any books that you've been reading lately that you'd like to recommend?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I read that Carmen Maria Machado book, Her Body and Other Parties, and it is so good. It's just, I mean, I think it's at the top of my list for the year. I just think it's so fantastic. Have you read it?
I haven't yet, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Good. It's so good. I really, really loved that. I also, this is silly and not related to what I'm writing right now at all, but I just read True Grit, Charles Portis's True Grit, and it is impeccable. Like, I don't know what I expected. You know, like, it was written in the 60s, but it's like set at the turn of the century. You know, it's set like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it's a Western, you know, but it's so funny. The language is so sharp. It's really pleasurable because it's a young woman narrator, and she's so just sharp and strong for a young woman narrator. It was really, really just fun to read. I think those are two of my most recent faves.
I have to say, I had to read one Western in grad school, and I haven't touched a Western since, so I don't even know if I would have thought of reading True Grit. But
I know.
You piqued my interest.
Yeah,
so.
I like Cormac McCarthy, and he kind of like, I feel like he is technically writes Westerns a lot of the time, but they're a different kind of twist on that, you know.
Right.
But also Robert Olmsted, I really like as a Western writer too. I don't know. I try to read outside of my comfort zone. At least 1 or 2 books, like in the major genres a year, just to kind of like see what's going on and to try and fill in some of the gaps in my backlog, in my back catalog too. True Grit, though, I mean, it was just, it was surprisingly enjoyable. Like, I want to, like, just give it to everyone for Christmas, because I think people, it was so great that they made that new movie version of it a few years ago, but I don't know that people realize what a literary feat it is, too. It's just really, really well done.
Okay. I think it's definitely going on my Goodreads list now.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a pleasure.
Hopefully you enjoyed that conversation with Jack and it piqued your interest in The Grip of It. You can find that book in our catalog, which you can search at our website at www.cooklib.org. While on our website, you can also check out Shelf Life, our blog, where we write about books, genealogy, local history, and share our podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share our podcast with your friends and family. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please send us an email at webmaster@cooklib.org. We'll be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.